My name is Salahuddin. I'm one of the fellowship here today. So I'm massively into Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter when I was a child. And I just thought, like, why has nobody ever done an Islamic take on things? Because popular culture is something that we're all surrounded by. Everyone just says it's haram, but like, we might as well have our own authentic take to it. And because the Prophet ﷺ said, take wisdom from, the wisdom is the lost property of the believer. But I will pass it on to Noor and Uzair to introduce themselves.
Hey, assalamu alaikum. My name is Noor. I am looking forward to reaching the Hobbit age of maturity next year at 33. And yeah, I've always, since I was maybe 11 and 12, loved Lord of the Rings. And I think it's always there are always lessons about talking in the language of the people that you're embedded in. And part of that is the pop culture language, like meme culture, all this sort of thing. We do have to be fluent in it. And also it just happens to be what we're into. So, so there are many reasons why it's happening. I'll pass it to Uzair.
So I'm Uzair, and just the same as the other guys, I think me and my twin brother just sort of Lord of the Rings fanatics growing up, and I think this was just a natural thing to sort of do, and just talk about Lord of the Rings and what we see from a spiritual perspective. And I attend lots of these religious lectures and stuff, and I can see a lot of the parables and a lot of the parallels as well within Lord of the Rings. Can you hear me? Okay? Okay. Cool. I just want to get started now. Okay. Yeah, let's go. I apologise, the bit on the right is slightly cut off, so...
Uzair, would you mind speaking a bit louder for the people on Zoom?
Okay,
I think they can.
Said anything?
No, but just.
So just holding it close to my mouth.
Yeah, just consciously speaking louder.
Okay, got it. Good and better. So, Lord of the Rings and Islam. This is our introduction. This is our table of contents. So we're going to cover quite a few of these topics. A lot of them are quite heavy, and there's a lot to discuss about them. But we thought we'd try and keep it quite short and concise and get some of the main points for each of them. So, introduction to Lord of the Rings. So, the impact of Lord of the Rings. So, Lord of the Rings itself, it's a fantasy novel that was created by sort of J.R.R. Tolkien off the back of his sort of experience in World War One and then World War Two, and also he spent a lot of time in in Birmingham. He grew up in Birmingham, so he saw the impact of, so for example, industrialization in Birmingham, and he wrote this book and he addressed a lot of the themes and a lot of the issues that he saw around him. So many of these sort of themes and sort of parables that are present in sort of Lord of the Rings is as a result of his sort of Catholic upbringing as well. So that's where we can sort of see these links and stuff. And yeah, so I think one of his sort of contemporaries was sort of C.S. Lewis, and his sort of Catholic faith impacted sort of C.S. Lewis, and he'd converted, and he was a Protestant, I think it was.
Yeah, from atheism.
So from atheism, and he wrote the sort of Chronicles of Narnia, and that is sort of steeped with sort of parables and sort of religious symbolisms. Tolkien himself did say that there's no sort of allegory in his works, but I think that was directed at C.S. Lewis, where there was overt symbolisms, where I think you have the lion being the sort of Christ-like figure, and I think his point with the lack of allegory, as he says, is he didn't want to be overt and obvious with his symbolisms. So that was sort of, I think, Tolkien's take on it, and I think as spiritual people, as religious people, or even non-religious people, there's a lot of I think you have this idea of the monomyth, where you have themes and wisdoms that you can draw from old stories and old parables, and I think that Lord of the Rings is steeped in it. So yeah, so that was the introduction, just as to sort of Tolkien's sort of background and stuff. I think I'm going to pass on to Nora to do the overview of, I think, the Lord of the Rings universe, and we try and keep it short. I know it's quite large, but just to give a brief overview of the universe and what's happened, just because we're going to reference quite a lot of points.
Thank you. Is this good? Louder?
Yeah.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Alright. So, okay, we're going to get into some nerd stuff right now. So, as we said, we're not saying Tolkien was a Muslim, but he was Christian. And there's a lot of stuff that we share, right? And he definitely built a lot of this into the way that the stuff that's in the background of all the things. You might not notice it when you're watching the movies or reading the main books, but there are hints there and there's a lot there. So basically, he's built it as if it's a history that could fit in 6,000 years before the present day here in our world. So the world that he talks about is shaped like our world, and it could sort of fit in as a sort of a replacement origin story for us, right? So here's the cast of characters. So there's Eru, who's conceived as the one god. He's also called Ilúvatar, which is the All-Father. Now, any Marvel fans here will recognise that as the name of Odin as well. So Tolkien was building in a lot of sort of the stuff that went into British culture that wasn't of a Christian origin. In the same way when you hear like a poltergeist story and you say, oh, that's Jinn, right? So you don't have to deny people's cultural stories, but there's a way of understanding them that fits into the way we understand the universe, right? So Eru is the one god, and he has his direct creation, and it's basically angels, Jinns, and Insan, man, right? So he has the Valar, which are kind of the major angels. They each have kind of a different personality. They have some freedom of will, but basically they exist to carry out the will of God, and they're immortal. You've got Maiar, which are the lesser angels, and you can kind of think of those as Jinn as well. The way to think about it is, if anybody's ever talked about like river spirits, or very specialised minor spirits that have specific powers to their tasks, that's the Maiar. So Gandalf, all the wizards started as Maiar, Sauron started as Maiar, and then you have Morgoth, who's sort of the fallen angel. We'll get into some of this stuff a bit more later, but you have angels, you have sort of lesser angels or kind of higher Jinn, and then they kind of do a lot of the work of creation in a delegated way. So they sing what's called the music of the Ainur. It's like a music of creation, and they each have their part, and none of them has the whole thing. So they don't really understand what it is they're creating, and they see things in it later on that surprise them. And there's one of them, this guy called Melkor, who sort of works against everybody else working in harmony. He's kind of doing his own thing. He's got a bit of an ego, but in a way, just like with Shaitan, even his disruptions, they're ultimately part of the plan. So there is no disrupting the plan of God, right? Then there is some elements of creation that he just reserves for himself, Eru, and that is elves and men. So elves are kind of immortal. They can be killed, but their long lives mean they have a long cultural memory. So in all of the stories of Lord of the Rings, they're the ones who, on the page, they're talking about the angels. They're talking about God. So when we study like the Quran, the people about God always talk about God. That's not the case with Lord of the Rings because Tolkien wasn't trying to be so obvious. You know what I mean? Like he was trying to hide it in there compared to C.S. Lewis. They're restricted to the material universe. So their immortality comes at a price. They have a limited heaven. Their heaven is within the material universe. Men are called the younger children of Ilúvatar. They have the gift of man. What's the gift of man? And this is a bit funny because we don't really think, well, it's very easy not to think of death as like a negative thing. Very easy to go that way. But death is referred to as the gift of man because they don't go where the elves go. Basically nobody knows where they go, and they go straight back to God. And he gives them their afterlife. And the men in this story, they mostly don't remember God or the angels, but their values can still be strong. And values is another piece. So belief in God is one thing, and then the values that you sort of live is another, and ideally you have both. And then you have the Hobbits. Nobody really kind of knows where the Hobbits come from. Their language is like the men of Rohan. They do seem to die like men, and therefore they might have the gift of man. But they have ears like elves, and there's a story in Bilbo's family about a legendary ancestor who had a fairy or elf wife. So there could be elements of both the children of Iluvatar there, and they are definitely part of the divine plan here. A little side note, there is also these half-elven people, which is where usually you have an elf mother and a father from the men. So in the first age you have Luthien and Beren, and their granddaughter Elwing marries the son of another man-elf marriage. Idril and Tuor have the son Erendil. They get together, Elwing and Erendil, and they have Elrond. Everybody knows Elrond. Elrond has a brother Elros. Now, the half-elven, they were given a choice. You get to choose if you want to be an elf or a man. Now, imagine that. If you have the choice between immortality, and you still get a heaven, but it's a known heaven, and it's limited, or you get to die, right? You get to choose to die, and then there's no limit to what you could get, okay? So you can choose the gift of man, and very few have chosen it. What's interesting here is that Arwen and Aragorn is the third one, and Arwen and Aragorn are descended from both sides of this. Arwen is descended from Elrond's daughter, and Aragorn is descended from Elros, who chose to be a man. So we're not just talking about Lord of the Rings in Islam, we're also talking about Lord of the Rings in Desi culture, because Arwen and Aragorn are cousins. So, after that, Aragorn logged on to Cuzmatch, and he found his wife. So they unite the branches of the half-elven. So I'm going to
hope we didn't offend anybody.
I come from that heritage myself. I get to say it. Okay, so the history of Middle Earth. I'm going to run through this very quickly. So there's the first age, which is when the first men wake up and become conscious of their surroundings. The elves have already woken up back before the sun, so the men rise with the sun, which I find very difficult to do nowadays. I wake up at like 8:50 and then pop onto my laptop for work. So Morgoth as Melkor, Melkor, before the men come along, he's been making mischief. He's like the big shaitan, right? So he goes along and he's saying to the elves, there's this other creation that's coming after you. They're going to drive you out of these lands, and they're the ones that Eru, that God really loves. And then some of the elves get a bit resentful, and Melkor just goes and causes a lot of trouble. You know how it is with this. You've seen more 4 lines. We all know about the Wassa Wassa. Morgoth. So Melkor becomes renamed Morgoth, which is basically a shaitanic name. It's like this guy's the enemy. So before the men come along, some of the elves invite to make hijra to this special elf heaven, and then men wake up. You have the first age. So the angels have already fought Morgoth and beaten him once. Then the men and elves come along and they fight Morgoth too. The funny thing is that, like I say, the angels, they pop into Earth and they don't quite understand what it is that they've built. And Melkor manages to find men before they do, turns some of them to worship him very bad. So he gets his new name, Morgoth. He kind of escapes the elves who are besieging him, and he kills this amazing elf. I won't get into it, but Fingolfin, one of the big shaheeds of the elves. And then Morgoth's body is basically ultimately destroyed, and his spirit's cast out. So then Morgoth is gone. That's the big shaitan gone. So in Islam, we don't really do fallen angels so much. We really talk about the Jinns. So then we talk about Sauron. So Sauron was basically Morgoth's sort of assistant. Now he becomes the big bad. He knows all this kind of, he's like a skilled smith. So he teaches the elves how to make rings, and then that's where all these rings of power come from. And again, Sauron goes along with the Wassa Wassa. He tells the men, you could be immortal if you really wanted to. All you have to do is invade elf heaven. And some of them sort of give in to him. The man king that captures him, Sauron becomes his vizier, and then kind of turns. Anyway, ultimately, a last alliance of elves, men, and dwarves. They finally defeat Sauron. Isildur takes the ring, and a bunch of elves leave Middle Earth. This is a constant theme throughout the story. The elves are leaving, and then with the fall of Sauron, the initial fall of Sauron, comes the third age. Now, Isildur has a chance to destroy the ring and end Sauron. Sauron is going to get into this, but he doesn't do that. Naughty boy. So then we have the third age. Isildur's ambushed and the ring vanishes. Deagle finds the ring, Smeagol kills him and becomes...
He's got an excellent Gollum impression. I'll be calling on him to do some Gollum impression.
So then, yeah, the ring stays hidden, and that's where everybody knows the events of the story that we're about to talk about. And then eventually, Fourth Age, and the elves go away, and we kind of get closer and closer to our magic-free lives today. So, over to Salahuddin.
Yeah, should we play the clip first?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to play a clip from the movie. I don't know, like, who knows this clip of Isildur and the ring and stuff like that? So we're going to play that clip first. Then I'm going to analyze it a little bit.
Very good.
The ring was forged, the one place to be destroyed. Cast it into the fire! Destroy it!
Okay.
Also, just kill him. Just kill him.
Yeah, but honestly, if I was Elrond, I would like fly kicked him into that fire. Friendship. But anyway, so I'm going to. So as you saw in the clip, like Isildur, who's for those of you who don't know Isildur is the ancestor of Aragorn, and that immediately shows you. So this section is on. So we're So basically, the first observation I want to make is the ring is a personification of the nafs, and that struggle Isildur has to cast the ring into the fire. It shows that the nafs, like the most evil part of yourself is your nafs. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the greatest jihad is to battle your own soul and to fight the evil within himself. And what's really interesting about that is that we all have that journey, like Isildur, like Frodo, to the cracks of Mount Doom, to sort of cast our nafs into the fire. But a lot of us often fail in our journey to do that. And also, I just want to go to Frodo. What's really interesting is throughout Lord of the Rings, when he's talking about nafs, Frodo talks about this really heavy load that he has upon himself and that journey to go to Mordor. And what's really interesting is that everybody sort of emphasizes to him there is no place to either caretake the ring or they can't really do anything to carry his burden. He has to carry that burden himself, and I think that's a lesson for all of us. Although Sam says like you've got that heroic scene in The Return of the Kings, I can share the load, and you got all that. So you got like that scene, but like truly, you're kind of on your own in your own journey. You're the only one who can really fight your nafs, really. So I think that's the biggest lesson out of all of this. And then also, I was reading a commentary of Lord of the Rings, and it said something really, really interesting. It says that although there's that physical manifestation and that physical journey of Frodo going to Mordor, going to the cracks of Mount Doom, actually it's also an allegory of his own internal Mordor, of his own internal struggles of casting the ring into the flames internally. And we all have that journey and struggle. And there's another hadith which comes to mind here. The ring, like the worst enemy is that which between our sides. So, in Ramadan, you have like when the shaitan's locked up, and there's that interlude where Sauron is locked up in Middle Earth and stuff like that. Between the Hobbit and just before the Hobbit, through kind of like end of the Second Age and everything. And really, you can't really blame Sauron for our wrongdoings and the wrongdoings of the people. But like in Ramadan, shaitan's locked up. And it's only between you and your nafs. It's really you and your nafs that are to blame for the bad things that you do. You can't just go around blaming shaitan. So I thought that was interesting. And then also, you know how every time Frodo puts on the ring, right? It's kind of like this waswasa of shaitan, or like the whisperings of shaitan, and you've got all these kind of Mordoric whisperings. And it sort of draws the servants of Sauron to him, and the kind of like, so for example, the Nazgul, and the attention of perhaps Sauron himself. And that's what happens. The ring is a personification of that. So I'll come back to kind of individual struggles of the nafs in a second, but before, I wanted to kind of elaborate on this idea of Sauron as Shaitan, basically. What's really interesting is that Tolkien in his letters says that Sauron denies the existence of God, saying that the One is merely the invention of the jealous Valar of the West, Valar being like the angels, the oracle of their own wishes. So basically, Sauron is inviting people on the manhaj or the path of shirk, basically. It's kind of like reject God, so, you know. And there's an episode before Lord of the Rings, there's this magical land called Numenor where men are gifted with long lives, but they're always jealous of the elves. So one of the kings, Ar-Pharazôn, tries to break the ban of the Valar, going to the kind of deathless lands. And basically the person who kind of gave him the waswasa or the shaitan's whisperings to do that was Sauron. And he's kind of like the shaitan of the series. And then he also invites them to commit shirk by kind of like stopping the worshipping of God, Eru Ilúvatar, and he gets them to start worshipping Morgoth, like the devil himself. So this devil worship, and that's really, really interesting. And and then Sauron also ensnares, like he creates the ring as a means of waswasa, of kind of like whispering. So he seduces the 9 men, the Nazgul, with the rings, and he tries to win over the dwarves and elves, and he corrupts the Numenorians. And then also, there's also an element of trying to play God, because Morgoth and Sauron have a hand in creating the orcs. Whoever doesn't know, the orcs are basically like mutilated elves, and they were bred as a mockery of the creation of God. So that's kind of like that shaitanic racist arrogance. Now we're going to go on to kind of like the case studies of unsuccessful kind of battles with the nafs. So that's so the Prophet ﷺ said, "There's none amongst you in which there is not a devil, and most hearts have been seized by the soldiers of Shaitan and fill them with whispers." And then there's also the 3 stages of the nafs. There's nafs al-ammara bis-su, which is that kind of the self which is commanded towards evil. There's nafs al-lawwama, which is that self-blaming self. So like that self which is kind of internally conflicted. And then so like you do bad things, but you have that consciousness of it. And then you have nafs al-mutma'inna, the reassured self, the kind of like the stage where you overcome your nafs. So I want to use Gollum as a parable of this. So you know when Gollum between Gollum and Smeagol, and they have their internal dialogue, you could almost say, because of those hadiths which talks about like the good and evil within us, it's like the internal dialogue of the nafs that he's having out loud. And you do a quick impression.
So Smeagol would say something like, "Master's my friend," and then Gollum retorts, "You don't have any friends." That's a pretty good example, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. There's that internal act also. So basically, I would say, like of those 3 stages of nafs that I mentioned, Gollum is initially nafs al-ammara bis-su, like this kind of like completely evil self. But I think because Frodo shows him kindness, he starts to have like doubts, and he has guilt, and he actually is inclined towards good. And he keeps some sort of promises, like to take them to Mordor and everything. But I think what's really interesting, the most interesting thing about Gollum, is that it shows you if you don't control your nafs, if you don't fight that most evil inclination within yourself, then you can be enslaved to the desires of the dunya. So that ring is the representation of that. And then he surrenders, as soon as he thinks Frodo's betrayed him, completely surrenders to that evil. Also, Saruman is really interesting. He's another example of like the nafs. What happens. So even if you are knowledgeable, and even if you're a person of deen, you can be corrupted. So he has, when Shaitan. So he has that shaitanic kind of arrogance where God, you created Adam from clay, and you created me from fire, and we're going to go a bit more into that later. But when Saruman disgraces himself, he loses that wilaya, he loses that kind of like knowledge. And it's really interesting. there's a parallel in the Quran, in Surah Qasas, where it's talking about Qarun, one of the people of Bani Israel, of Musa, and he sort of like makes dua so he can have wealth and stuff like that. And he's given that wealth. But what's really interesting is that when people try to advise him, he says that all his wealth that he's amassed is due to the knowledge and superiority of the knowledge that he has. And it's a direct correlation to Saruman, because Saruman's supposedly amongst the good people of Middle-earth, the Istari, the wizards. Yet it shows that even he, so it shows you the importance of even guides having mentors. So, Musa alayhi salam had Khidr, and he is not, he's humble enough to go and seek help. When he goes and meets Fir'aun, he asks for so he can take his brother. And Boromir as well, he's really interesting case of nafs. So he's initially enslaved by the ring, and he has, so Lord of the Rings, it shows like that even when you want to use the ring for good, it will take you over. But he has that nafs al-lawama, that self-incriminate, when you start to feel a little guilty about the bad things that you do. And he redeems himself by becoming shaheed. So we'll go a bit more into martyrdom a bit later. Also, I wanted to get into... so also there's the arrogance of the civilizations of Middle-earth. So that, there's... like a lot of civilizations in Middle-earth, you have in the Silmarillion, you have Gondolin, you have Numenor, and also in Lord of the Rings, you have the civilizations of like Arnor, Eriador, Ithilien, which becomes Minas Morgul, and the civilization of Saruman is basically destroyed because of their arrogance. And you see the Quran is replete with references of all these civilizations like Ad and Thamud, which are destroyed, and partly because of their arrogance. And also, so now we're going to talk about the importance of sohbah, like the importance of having companions to fight your nafs. So, I would say, Gollum, you need a path. The fellowship basically is like a tariqah or like a path towards spirituality. You need friends to be around you. You need company. And Gollum has been alone with the ring for like 400 to 500 years. And because he doesn't have that suhbah and that guidance from sheikhs like Gandalf, basically Gandalf is like the ultimate the sheikh of tariqah, basically. Of Sufism, he doesn't have Bilbo, when he tries to compel, Gandalf can compel Bilbo to get rid of the ring, to kind of let go of it, and Sam can also help Frodo out of his from the worst excesses of the ring, and also Khidr alayhi salam is there to mentor Musa alayhi salam. Quick commentary about the characters of Middle-earth and their disposition towards evil. So each race has a different sort of threshold of nafs. So the men are the weakest, but they're ultimately redeemable. So so you have the nine Nazgûl, so they are completely corrupted towards evil. Then you have, but Boromir is really interesting because he shows that redemptive feature because he's able to kind of make amends by becoming a martyr. And you have the dwarves who are really greedy and stubborn, and they delve really deeply into the earth. And there's actually a hadith of the end times that talks about that treasure which will be uncovered at the mountain of gold of the Euphrates. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Do not take anything from it." And the dwarves then attract the kind of greed of Smaug and the battle of the 5 armies, blah blah blah. So then what's interesting about the Hobbits is they're like the most resilient to the law of temptations of the ring. They're very much part of the earth, and then also, the ring is a test for everybody, for Galadriel, for Gandalf. Also, then quickly going on to the temptations of the world and power. So the ring is a symbol of temptation, but it reminds me of the Prophet ﷺ time when the Quraysh, the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, they tried to persuade him to kind of get rid of his mission. And they offered him kingship over the Quraysh and over Arabia. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "I will not give up on my mission, even if you put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left." And then you have Yusuf alayhi salam tested with Zulayha. Then you have, and Saruman is tested by that, and he fails that. He justifies joining Sauron as his dominance is called inevitable. And and it's just, there's many people within, and then many people within Lord of the Rings are sort of like offered that power and kind of dominion if they give up kind of the quest to destroy the ring. And Boromir is another example. He tries to use the ring for good, but ultimately it will enslave you. Now, coming towards how, like Gandalf is a perfect example of overcoming your nafs, and I'll tell you why. So Gandalf goes, when he dies, for example, and then he's reborn and becomes Gandalf the White. So Christians would say that's like the resurrection of Christ. I would like to say, if for us, it shows you that Gandalf, when he defeats the Balrog, and he kind of like in the Mines of Moria, he basically kills off or overcomes his nafs. It's a representation of that. And he proceeds onto the third stage of like the nafs, which the nafs al-mutma'inna is like the contented soul, which is sort of free of the, it's in control of all your temptations. And basically, how in the Sufism we have this idea of dying before you die? So basically Gandalf represents that. So he dies before he dies. So he kills off that nafsi part of himself. And what's really interesting is that after the ring is destroyed, like other people, like even Frodo, Bilbo, he's very content about like the ring being gone, although he has a quick moment where he kind of longs for it, but otherwise it's like nafs al-mutma'inna, like a contented soul. And the last, just to close off this section, talking about, how we talked about jihad and nafs, like fighting the nafs, there's also jihad al-qatl, like the physical jihad, like on the battlefield. So in the Quran you have this, if anybody's prevent or anything like, like, please don't report me, this is all just intellectual. Anyway. So you have that, so even within jihad al-qatl you have this appeal to that kind of better side of yourself. So it says, fight in the Quran, it says, Surah Baqarah, it says, fight in the way of God, those who fight against you, fight those who fight against you, but do not transgress. God does not like transgressors. So you see that, like, you have complete examples within the seerah. So, like, when Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, like, one of his enemies spits in his face in the middle of battle, and then he doesn't slay him. The enemy goes, like, why didn't you slay me? He said, well, if I killed you, then I would have killed you out of my nafs, basically, not for the sake of God. And you have that kind of ethic running throughout Lord of the Rings. So it's Gollum that, there's a lot of pity and mercy shown towards Gollum, and if it wasn't for, and it ties into fate as well, so if it wasn't for Frodo, because Frodo, let's be frank, he fails in his test to overcome the ring. He becomes enslaved by nafs, and he actually wants to keep the ring. Whereas that moment of mercy and pity that he showed to Gollum actually comes because Gollum fights him for the ring, and then he falls into the kind of fires of Mount Doom. And Gandalf has all that foresight about showing why it's important to show mercy. And then just quick other examples of mercy. Like Grima, the guy who is the kind of like poisonous advisor to the King of Dead, and like he tries to poison the king's mind, and he's kind of like he's like Saruman's kind of like like sidekick, I could say. And then also like at the end, after it's also this kind of idea of being magnanimous in defeat. So when Aragorn defeats the kind of like men of the eastern races, as they call them, the Easterlings, after they have a campaign to fight them, he sort of like allows them to live in peace so long as they do not cause war. And then also after Helm's Deep, the Battle of Helm's Deep? So there's this evil race of men called the Dunlendings. And actually, like Saruman had tried to turn the Dunlendings against the men of Rohan, saying they were brutes, but actually the men of Dunland were spared and they were treated with mercy. So it reminds me of Fatah Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ goes to Mecca and he is merciful towards the people of Mecca, even though they were his enemies. So I'm going to move on to next section. So I'm going to talk about death. So I'm going to read out a kind of section, something from Tolkien's letters actually. So he said that the core theme of Lord of the Rings is death and the human desire to escape it. And it is about death and destinousness. And yeah, so it's mainly concerned with death and the kind of idea of people wanting to escape death. So, as Noor mentioned, it talks about the men, like the creations of God, like men. And what's really interesting is that in some of the commentaries, so we have that hadith, it says, in Tirmidhi, it said, death, the gift to a believer is death. And what's really interesting is that, in some of the commentaries of Lord of the Rings, some people have said that the true believers and the righteous will welcome death when it arrives, and death is merely a sort of transitional stage, and it's not supposed to be seen as painful or fearsome. And I thought that's an incredibly Islamic attitude towards death. Then, also that part in Lord of the Rings with the men of the mountains who kind of the oath breakers, and Aragorn says to them, I release you. And you see that kind of look of relief on their faces, and that shows you that death is a kind of savior from disgrace. And then also there's a verse in the Quran that says, wherever you space will be, death will overtake you, and even if you are in fortresses built up strong and high. So there's no point escaping death, and actually death is a relief. And remember we mentioned about men having kind of an undefined fate, except we know that they go back to God. And that's, I kind of seen as a relief, because elves live immortally and everything, and they get weary of Middle Earth and the Earth. And then I'd like to play a clip actually about Gandalf's sort of perspective of death in the middle of the battle for Minas Tirith. We're all following so far?
Yeah. Yes. So, here we go. Press the green button on the top right. Okay. Don't think of the damage.
No, it's the loudest. It's your laptop.
It's my laptop.
Yeah. It's fine, just play.
It's the loudest as well.
Okay, it's fine. There, if you go back to if you put it next to output, then it's probably on its lowest. Yeah, it's good setting. Yeah.
After this section, we're going to have a break. So.
Yeah, do the YouTube. Do you have it on YouTube? Or if not, just do the microphone thing, like you said.
I think you should just do microphone. Just the speakers over there. I'm just going to replay this once again.
Everyone here?
Don't think of the damage.
Death is just another path. Once one is taken, grey curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass. And then you see.
Enough. See what?
White swords. Behind them. A far great country. It was swift sunrise.
Alright, stop the second. Alright, so I know that we couldn't all hear the clip, but so I'm going to explain the clip quickly. So it's talking, so you're like in the middle of Battle of Minas Tirith, and Pippin is just, he asks, is this the end? And then Gandalf says, no, it's not the end. There's much more. He basically suggests that there's an afterlife after death. So he says, death is a journey we must all take. Death is not the end. Death is just kind of like another great adventure. So it's quite Dumbledoric, but it's also quite Islamic because it says there's that Quranic verse, "Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut," like every soul will taste death, and it's basically talking about the inevitability of death. And then it talks about in the kind of Lord of the Rings universe, so elves go to this place in elf heaven called the halls of Mandos, and then they're kind of re-embodied, but then men go to kind of like Iluvatar, like God, and their kind of fate is unknown. But so he's suggesting there is an afterlife. So, and then also, I wanted to say that martyrdom it plays a massive role in Lord of the Rings. And so for example, in Islam, we have a martyrdom of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu anh. We also have the companions of Badr, and also, you could say in Lord of the Rings, there's some really big martyrs, so Boromir is a Shaheed basically, and also so are many other people who fight in the Battle of Helm's Deep, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and the Black Gate. And what's really interesting is that then also you have the idea, just the attitude towards death was really Islamic. We've got another clip.
Oh, we're going to try that.
Yeah, we'll try it.
So, death.
So who remembers the charge of the hero? In the last.
Have you checked the toolbar? Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Should be fine. Oh, wow.
Spears shall be shaken, shields shall be splintered, a sword day, a red day, and the sun rises!
Stay with me. I'll go to you.
Lie down! Lie down! Lie! Lie to ruin! And the world can die!
Okay, so what's really interesting, so you see they all, like he says, ride to ruin, and they all just start shouting death, and I thought, wow, mashallah, first of all. And then, second of all, it reminds me of the story of Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu anhu. So when he was, I think it was either he was facing the Romans or the Persians, he said that, for I bring men who deserve death as ardently as you deserve life. And as soon as I watched that scene of death, it reminded me of what Khalid bin Walid said. So they're willing to sacrifice themselves and to, for kind of freedom of Middle Earth. And, you have those kind of episodes in Islam, when they're almost about to be wiped out, the Battle of Badr, they take a final stand. But Noor will go a bit more into all of that. And then also you have the idea that the true mu'min is not afraid to die, and the death is the end to all comforts and the destroyer of all pleasures. And I wanted to quickly make that, so in Lord of the Rings and the Lord of the Rings universe, you have a lot of the death of these civilizations like Arnor, Ered, Ithilien, Numenor, and eventually the death of the world at some stage. So it shows you that death just destroys everything. And then also, just to finish off this section, about death and fate. So there's a verse in the Quran that says, "Indeed, Allah alone has the knowledge of the hour, sends down the rain, and knows, and no soul perceives what will earn tomorrow. No soul perceives in what land it will die. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted." So there's many times throughout the trilogy where like many of the main characters, like Frodo, Sam, and sort of like the companions of the Fellowship could have died so many times, but fate intervened. And so only Allah knows. And I found it really interesting that in the verse it says, "No soul perceives in what land it will die." So will he die in Gondor? Will he die in Mordor? Will he die in Rohan? It's not known. So Frodo could have died in Mordor, but he didn't. Yes.
So we're just on a break right now. We'll get the technicals working properly. So if you want to grab a tea at the back, go for it. And we'll be back in 10 minutes. So at 3:30, we'll be back, and we have about 4 or 5 sections after that.
Can I ask a question to everyone? Far, are you following? Yes. Is it interesting? Is it engaging?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
The poison's few. Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly.
Have you heard nothing Lord Elrond has said? The ring must be destroyed.
I suppose you think you're the one to do it. And if we fail, what then? What happens when Sauron takes back what is his? I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf. No one trusts a man.
Also,
Can everyone hear everything?
The horsemen took your land. They drove your people into the hills to scratch a living off rocks. Take back the lands they stole from you. All they made the names. We have only to remove those who oppose us.
Alright, so racism and social justice. So there are obviously different races in the world of Lord of the Rings, and they have differences. Now we know this is just like us. God created all of us different so that we could get to know each other, right? But differences don't have to cause resentment and enmity. But sometimes they do, and sometimes, as you saw there with the elves and the dwarves, they have a history. So the elves are the elves are very sort of nature focused. The dwarves are builders, and they dig for mineral wealth. And they, because of partly the influence of Sauron, they became very greedy. And there's all sorts of baggage. There's a lot of elves that killed some dwarves. There's a lot of dwarves that killed some elves. All that sort of stuff. Now, there's also, we saw a clip of Saruman poisoning some men of the east, was it?
Dunlanders.
The Dunlanders.
We live next door.
They live next door to Rohan, the Horse Lords, and so quite often, there's 2 ways you can go. If you want to poison a population, you can just do the big lie, or you can mix some truth with some distortion. So, sometimes different peoples have different material conditions. Rivendell is very rich where Elrond is. Clearly not all of Middle-earth lives in wealth. The Dunlanders don't have great lives probably. And when we have these differences, these sort of injustices, even if the Rohirrim aren't to blame, something has gone wrong somewhere, and somebody has less and somebody has more. And sometimes prejudice comes from falsehood, but sometimes it's encouraged by something that a villain can point to and say, look, those guys are your enemy, therefore I'm your friend. Okay? And also the elves, so the different races have different dispositions, and therefore they regard each other differently. So the elves, they live very, very long lives, thousands and thousands of years. How are they going to interact with a kind of people that live 100 years, 150 years, 250 years? I think it's telling that the dwarves are the next longest lived, and they're the ones that the elves have actual drama with. Everybody who lives less than that, the elves basically ignore. I think at one point in the book, an elf refers to men and hobbits as basically sheep. Do you pay attention to the goings on of sheep? It's very dismissive, and there is arrogance there. But basically, what happens is that if there is something that can be exploited to divide you, then there's always somebody there to exploit that divide. And obviously, prejudice is wrong in itself, regardless of what the material implications of that are, but also it's also unproductive. And you never want to focus on just one without the other. But it's because of pre-existing hatreds that Sauron can come in, that Saruman can come in and exploit it. And so if there was a more sort of equitable distribution, the dwarves are another example with, in The Hobbit, the men of Dale, who live right where Smaug the dragon lives. They resent the fact that the dwarves, when they took the mountain back, didn't share in, as much of the wealth as they could have. And so for no reason that had to be, the dwarves and the men of Dale have resentment. So then the men of Dale have really high tolls, and that annoys the dwarves. So here's the thing. There are things that divide us that we can't help in the sense that there are differences between us. There are also things that divide us that we can help, and that's where one of us has an advantage that somebody else is going to perceive as unfair, and we can just do more for each other. So there's also, we've talked about some of the men, especially the men who are descended from somebody who made a choice to be mortal. They can very easily resent their mortality, and they can resent those that don't have it, so they resent the elves. On the other hand, the elves sometimes are quite jealous of the ability of man to die and flee kind of the material realm. That does get boring after a while if you live there for thousands and thousands of years. And also, if you look at hobbits aren't really a focus of hate, but they are dismissed. Nobody really knows about them, but the ones that do don't really pay them much attention. And Saruman is a key example of this. Saruman, he's always been jealous of Gandalf in the way that everybody loves Gandalf, but he's never bothered to try to imitate the way that Gandalf loves everybody. And Gandalf spends time learning about people, and Saruman doesn't. And so he misses things, and one of the things he misses, very material things with regard to the ring. But Saruman is basically shaitanic, because what's the sin of Iblis, and what's the sin of Saruman and Sauron and Sauron's old boss, Morgoth? Fundamentally, they believe that they are better than you, and that betterness gives them certain rights over you, and no rights for you over them. So Saruman's arrogance turns him into a shaitan. From a different perspective as well, there's also a gender roles thing to look at here. So Eowyn is from a very fierce, warlike people. She's trained in combat, but quite often she's dismissed and sort of given, admittedly very important tasks, but tasks that somebody else could do, and tasks where the roles seem to be gendered, even if she could probably hold her own on the battlefield. So she and Merry, a hobbit, are both told to stay behind from the battle that we saw when with the charge of the Rohirrim at the Pelennor Fields, but then they end up killing the chief of the Nazgûl. So that's a thing where, if they'd given that prejudice, maybe that wouldn't have happened. And also Arwen, for some real life drama, when she saves Frodo in the crossing to Rivendell, in the books that's something that's done by a male elf, Glorfindel, and there was a lot of unnecessary drama about that change to a female elf. Another thing about this is that if you look at the Fellowship itself, even if you just look at the Hobbits, there are differences among the Hobbits in society. So Merry and Pippin, they're kind of the idle, young, rich, basically, they're nobility. Merry is destined to become the Master of Buckland. Pippin is destined to be the Thane of the Shire, which is a position they invented after Aragorn's ancestors, the kings, disappeared. So Merry and Pippin are Hobbit nobility, as is Frodo. But Merry and Pippin have to serve throughout the whole of their quest. They're never really in charge of anything. Whereas Sam, who's a gardener, son of a gardener, he is basically in charge of the group before Strider comes along, and even while Strider's there, Aragorn's there. And sometimes he's actually more powerful than Frodo against the ring. And basically, we'll look at this a bit more when we look at the next section. But community protects the weak, whereas arrogance and individualism leaves them at mercy of oppression and the elements. And the last thing to say here is that no, that's for the next section. So Morgoth, Sauron, and Saruman, they all believe that they are better, and they all trick the peoples of Middle-earth into thinking that the problems between them, while real, that they trick them into thinking they are unsolvable except through violence and taking. That's that section. Do you want to add one quick thing?
Just one quick thing I wanted to add on racism and social justice. So, like the Prophet ﷺ's message was empowering for society, so it lifted up the most marginalized and oppressed people of society to have a role in the in the message of Islam. So Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu was a black person in an Arabian society. He was also an enslaved person until Bilal radiallahu anhu freed him, and yet he was given a role to make the adhan, the call to prayer, and literally his contribution still echoes through Islam to this day. And also in Lord of the Rings, people who are deemed to be the most marginalized or the most underestimated, like the Hobbits, they have a massive role in kind of remaking Middle-earth. So that's I just wanted to make that parallel between the Seerah and the world of Middle-earth.
Yeah, I was just saying there was one clip that we haven't got that I've just thought of, which is at the very end when Aragorn's been crowned and he's just been married. Then everybody's they're kind of going through the crowd and they come across the four hobbits, and the hobbits bow to them, and Aragorn says, "My friends, you bow to no one." And everybody there, men, elves, dwarves, bows to these four hobbits. Haram, haram. Okay, but if you contrast that to just 18 months ago, nobody knew about hobbits. Nobody, and the ones who knew didn't pay them any importance. And now they are basically the ring bearer and his friends. They're the ones that save the world, and everybody knows it. Yeah.
This is it's proper B-Tech, but yeah, I'm gonna have to do it.
Hurry! Freshman sandwich is the shop.
You mean not to follow? Frodo's fate is no longer in our hands.
Let us all be in faith. The fellowship has failed.
Not if we hold true to each other. We will not abandon Merry impendent to torment and death. Not while we have strength left.
With all that can be spared, he had.
Travel light. Let's have some walk.
What's all that dying fighting side by side?
Not side by side with a friend.
I can do that.
So, Companionship. Obviously, the first book in the series, the first film, is called The Fellowship of the Ring. And that's who you are, your companions, your fellows, your Sahaba. That's her. So, none of this is one guy against the world. None of this is one guy standing against the great evil. You can't do it on your own. You fall into despair, and I think Saladin's going to talk about despair. So, what do? You don't do what Melkor does, Morgoth, Sauron's old boss. You don't do what Sauron does, Saruman. They seek ultimate power, and ultimate power is ultimately a lonely thing. Because if you want to be supreme, you can't have anybody next to you. And the people... Who remembers the show The Weakest Link? Yeah? At some point, you start getting rid of the people who are strong and ganging up on the people who are weak, but also getting rid of the people who are strong because they could threaten you. So for one thing, it's actually not a great way to succeed. But in another thing, you're always alone. Because if you are teaming up with somebody, for one of you to get supreme power, one of you is going to stab the other in the back. And this is exactly what Saruman means to do. So Saruman's not exactly a servant of Sauron, or at least that's not how he thinks, because he's deluded. He thinks he's going to let Sauron keep going until the ring reveals itself to Sauron. And then he thinks he's smart enough and quick enough to beat Sauron to the punch, take the ring, beat Sauron, and be the king of Middle-earth. So that's the delusion he's operating under. Of course, because he doesn't have any companions, he doesn't spend time with everybody like Gandalf does. Gandalf, he is more powerful than everybody, but he doesn't lord it over you when you're together. He cares about you. He can be a friend to hobbits. He can be a friend. He could probably be a friend to Smeagol if he'd gone to him soon enough. And so Saruman doesn't bother having friends, and so he doesn't understand anybody, and therefore he ultimately doesn't understand anything. And so he's always been doomed to failure. So so that's loneliness, right? Loneliness, solitude, going out for yourself. On the other hand, if your goal isn't just power, you can team up with people. If you're trying to do something good, maybe none of us would be up here on our own without each other. This is a fellowship, right? Even when Saladin, he managed to step up and do the Harry Potter one on his own, but there was work that he did behind that with half a dozen people.
Yeah, it's collaborative.
So there's always a fellowship, even if there's an Amir, right? So Amir Saladin. So it's everything. Like when you find it hard to pray, you go to the mosque or you pray with your family. When you find it hard to work out, God knows, you get a personal trainer or you get a gym buddy. And depending on the kind of companions you get, they have an effect on your soul. So one of the easiest ways to get good deeds and to make yourself more inclined to good deeds is to sit with the people who are themselves. And if there's something that you want to change about yourself, and you're hanging out with the people who do those things that you want to change, or who have that attitude, then they're going to keep you there longer than you need to be. But whereas good companionship will lift you up. And what's telling is, we saw a clip of when Frodo and Sam, tellingly, have just gone off. Frodo tries to go off on his own, and Sam, who's wiser than Frodo in some ways, doesn't let him. Even when the Fellowship of Nine breaks down, they're rarely, if ever, on their own. Aragorn goes with Gimli and Legolas. Frodo goes with Sam. Merry goes with Pippin, and then, with Eowyn, while Pippin goes off with Gandalf. So they always have somebody. And that's important because it gives you somebody to laugh with, even in the face of despair. And we saw that Gimli's kind of attitude of swashbuckling, we call it, like where you kind of laugh in the face of death, and it's easy to do that if there's somebody laughing with you. So that's why Gimli can say, I can die side by side with a friend. Maybe if you were alone, you wouldn't be able to stand up to it. The Nazgul, of course, they're only united because they've surrendered their free will to Sauron. So even though they have a common purpose, that's because it's basically just Sauron operating through puppets. And the same goes for the other henchmen, the orcs, who don't really have any real solidarity among them. So that's what it is. That's the contrast of lonely power versus a team trying to save the world from the implications of that power. That's that.
working tech as well, and I don't know why it's not working.
While we're doing that, I forgot one big piece about companionship, is that companionship is really the only thing that can overcome prejudice. If you have a prejudice against some category of people in your life, in your mind, because of your upbringing, it's often because you haven't spent time with those people. And so Legolas and Gimli, they never really hung out with elves, and dwarves never really hang out with elves, and elves never with dwarves. Look at the contrast from their fight at the Council of Elrond to in the face of almost certain doom. Gimli doesn't. It's not just that Legolas is one of the good ones, or Gimli's just one of the good ones. Like it's so easy to be in our world today, but Gimli does not hate elves. He's smitten with Galadriel, and he thinks Legolas is basically a good sword, and so his people must be. Where are we ready?
Yeah, we guys.
Cool. Yeah.
There's something down there.
It's gone. He's been following us for 3 days.
He escaped the dungeons of Barad-dûr.
Escape. More settlers. Now the ring is gone again. He won't never do when it is even to fight. He hates and loves the ring. As he hates and loves himself. Smeagol's life is sad for him. Yes, Smeagol, he was once called, before the ring found him. Before it drove him mad.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Pity. It was pity that Stable was real. Many that lived deserved death. Some that died deserved life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too naked and deal with death and judgment. Even very wise to see all ends. My heart tells me that God will listen without the plan yet, for good or ill. Before this is over, the pity of Bilbo may mean nothing to me.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the right evil. Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you also are meant to live it. And that is an encouraging thought.
So there's a lot happening there, and there's a lot that I think others will talk about. I think Sullivan has talked about mercy. It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. But what I want to look at is the theme here is against all odds. And when we talk about odds, when we talk about luck or fortune as believers, what we really mean is the plan. What we mean is providence, a plan that we don't really understand until maybe even once we've lived through it. So one of the key signs, and by the way, people talking about basically fate is one of the key ways that religious themes come onto the page or onto the screen. Because think of what Gandalf says there. Bilbo was meant to find the ring. What does that mean? Who meant it? There was a who there. Frodo was also meant to have it. And what you see is that a lot of things happen just in time, against all odds. Frodo leaves Bag End minutes before the Nazgul arrive to find him. When the Nazgul attack him on Weathertop and stab him, in the book, Frodo calls on the angel Elbereth, and he pulls out his knife and he slashes at the Witch King. And because he does that, he throws himself forward. The sword enters his shoulder and not his heart. Right? Just one of these close shaves, just right. He's rescued just in time as crossing into Rivendell. Their fellowship happens to be 9, which mirrors the Nazgul's 9. The fact that Bilbo spared Gollum, as Gandalf says there, Gandalf saw far. And it's not that he knew, but he was wise because he knew people and he studied. And Gollum was alive to follow Frodo to Mount Doom. And just when Frodo has failed and it seems that all is doomed, Gollum plays his role. Just like Shaitan plays his role, but Gollum plays his role, and he attacks Frodo and ultimately falls into the fire with the ring. And so Frodo's slip there doesn't have to mean defeat. And even like Elrond, again, he mentions this in the books, but there's this council at Elrond's house where there's dwarves. Boromir's there. The woodland elves are there. They're all there for different reasons. And actually, Elrond didn't invite anybody there for any particular date or time. They just turned up. They happened to be there at the right time to have the right conversation, to have the right mix of people there to be in the fellowship. And even we talked about before, everybody nobody really knowing about hobbits, and that includes Smeagol. And on the one hand, that's an implication for the way that people deal with different kinds of people. On the other hand, it's again another side of the plan. So the fact that nobody really knows about hobbits means Sauron doesn't know about hobbits. Saruman barely cares. And so that enables the ring to stay out of sight for thousands of years in total. And so what we see here is that, for one thing, it's never too unlikely. There can always be intervention, because fundamentally that's what a miracle is, right? An intervention in the way that things would ordinarily run. So 1,000,000 to 1 shot is not too long a shot, unless you have 1,000 to 1 shot, and you should really take that one. But if that's all you have, then do it. And don't fall into despair, because behind all chance, that's where God is. So you're never operating on blind luck. This is true in a lot of things. It's not a very good story if you always win really comfortably. If you always, beat AS Roma 7-1 in the Champions League, right? That's fun, but it's not nourishing. And that's why even like Star Wars Rogue One, all these things, Harry Potter, all of these things, you escape by the skin of your teeth, but it's not because you're smart, and it's not because you're strong. It's not even because you're lucky. It's because you happen to align yourself with right, and God carries you the rest of the way. So these remind me to Islam us up a little bit more. But of course, what's the key experience in Muslim history for that? The Battle of Badr, 300 men against 1,000. 313 against 1,000 Quraysh. And again, if you would say there was never if you were operating without God, you would say there was never a hope. There was only a fool's hope, which is something that Gandalf says at one point in the films. But the men fighting at Badr, the Muslims fighting at Badr, they know with every fibre in their body that God is with them, and that carries them through. And also, so the Battle of the Black Gate. There's a point where Frodo is edging closer and closer to Mount Doom, and the idea is that if he even looks into his kingdom at all, if he looks behind his walls, he's going to see like a couple of hobbits like pretending to be orcs and kind of failing, and sort of crawling their way through towards the mountain, and he's going to freak out. So you have to distract him, and so what you do is you pretend that you're going to attack him, but actually you can't pretend. You have to go there, but you know he's got tens of thousands of orcs in there. He's got trolls. He's got all sorts. And you saw them being surrounded there. I think in the clip where Gimli says you could die side by side with a friend. So I think somebody says we cannot achieve victory through strength of arms. And Aragorn says no, but we can give Frodo the chance he needs. We can draw the eye of the enemy out, and it's just that little sliver. Because maybe Frodo doesn't make it, but you give him a chance. If that means you don't throw away your life, but you choose your chance and you spend it, you invest it, and you get your returns. Certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for? That's Gimli, by the way. So I don't think I have anything there. So move on. Yeah. Sorry, I thought we were getting.
Yeah. Okay, so 17. Yeah. So we've just got a few more sections to go now. Yeah, really quick.
Are we still awake, by the way? People can't hear it back. But it's just like an extended road.
It's been fun.
Okay.
Oh, I can do that. Okay, cool. There you go.
The old world will burn in the fires of industry. Forests will fall. A new order will rise. We will drive the machine of war with the sword and the spear and the iron fist of the orc.
We want them armed and ready to march within 2 weeks. But my lord, there are too many. They cannot all be armed in time. We don't have the means. Build a dam, plug the stream, work the furnaces night and day. We don't have enough fuel to feed the fires.
The forest of Fangorn lies on our doorstep. Burn it.
Yeah. I wonder why the Urukai are cockneys. It's just it's a bit prejudiced than anything.
Give this one a try as well.
In fact, it has been remarked by some that Hobbits' only real passion is for food. A rather unfair observation, as we have also developed a keen interest in the brewing of ales and the smoking of pipeweed. But where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet and good tender. For all hobbits share a love of things that grow. And yes, no doubt to others our ways seem quaint. But today, of all days, it is brought home to me. It is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life.
the scene.
Treebeard, some call me.
And whose side are you on?
Side. I am on nobody's side, because nobody is on my side, little orc. Nobody cares for the woods anymore.
We're not orcs. We're hobbits.
So let me know if you don't hear me at the back. That is Nathaniel. Yeah? Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned before, Tolkien grew up he was born in South Africa, and then he was raised in just outside of Birmingham, and what he did see was the degradation of the countryside in Birmingham. So he'd gone to war and he'd come back, and what he essentially saw was he saw industry taking over. So he saw millions of people being killed. So he was in trench warfare, and he also so there's poison gas. So everything to do with industrialization he witnessed and he saw, and there's a disdain for it as well. Now, so that's his sort of background. So you can see the way he's painted the narrative with nature and technology. So you can see with the Ents and the forest, they were his sort of personification of nature itself. And then you have his sort of characterization of the Hobbits. They were of the earth. They were they loved sort of tilling the earth, and they loved growing things on the earth. So that was their nature. And he also said himself, if I was to be a character in The Lord of the Rings, I would be a Hobbit myself. And then you have that in sort of comparison to Saruman, who said he's going to drive the industry of war, and he's going to burn the forest, Fangorn Forest, where the Ents where Treebeard was from. So Tolkien and his sort of background, with his background, painted this narrative, or painted this sort of sub-narrative with an overarching narrative of sort of good versus evil, and his sort of sub-narrative was nature versus industry. And you can see that in the personification with his characters in the film. And even in the books, that is, but even in the films itself, sort of New Zealand presents like a quite a beautiful backdrop, like a canvas for what Tolkien tried to sort of capture in his books. This sort of the beauty of nature, and I think as sort of film lovers ourselves, we sort of love that. So the Shire offers a sort of utopic vision of the natural world, as we saw, and the Hobbit holes, as a lot of you are probably aware of, is literally intertwined within the earth itself. So you can say that the Hobbits are of the earth, and that's important for later on. And then you have sort of natural symbolism throughout the films. So you have Gandalf's staff. It's like an oak tree. You have Lothlorien, and you have Rivendell. You have the actual cities themselves, or the cities themselves, all intertwined in the waterfalls and the trees. So what Tolkien is doing is he's painting this good versus evil narrative where everything to do with nature, or on the side of nature, is what's good. So we've just seen that. So Tolkien is an anti-industrialist. He is, and he's a avid environmentalist. So he was one of the early people in the movement to advocate for sort of stewardship and environmental conservatism. So again, Tolkien's painted this sort of good guy versus bad guy narrative with nature and industry, with Saruman against the Hobbits and Gandalf. And then I think was the most profound statement for myself was when what Bilbo says, he goes, where hearts truly lie. I'm not going to pause, by the way. He goes, where hearts truly lie is good till death, and we like to live simple, a simple good life. And then also within sort of Tolkien's universe, anything that's associated with the environment and stuff, you have the Dunedain, you've got the Elves, you've got Tom Bombadil, who's more in the books, has a synergy and a relationship with nature, as opposed to sort of Sauron and Saruman and the orcs. They tend to destroy it. So part of like the Hobbits' nature is their attachment to the nature is their attachment to nature. Oh, well, that's their quality. But as a result, they do not seek power because they're from this earth. You can say that they're close to. You can say they're fitra. You can say like they're primordial in essence, or they're not looking for worldly things. You can say. And then you have this sort of Saruman within the Lord of the Rings, where he is looking to burn down the forest and drive industry, and that is in his pursuit of power. So Tolkien's bringing out this idea of seeking power and the degradation of nature, or taking advantage of nature. So you can say lack of spirituality and lack of awareness of the sacredness of nature, and I think that's what Tolkien was trying to capture. I'm going to skip as much as I can. I'm keeping an eye on time. Cool. I'm going to move on to Ents fighting back. So I think, again, as I mentioned before, you have Ents in the personification of nature. And as you heard just there, Tribute says that he's on nobody's side because nobody's on his side. And what Tolkien was trying to say there was, at his time in the 20s, 30s, 40s, when he was writing the books, was there's no advocates of the environment, there's no stewardship, and again that's what he was advocating. So he was just talking about a complete, I don't know what philosopher said it, but we've become humans are now beginning to take advantage of nature. So he was just saying now in modernity we are taking advantage of nature because there is no spirituality. And then in terms of like sort of spirituality and stuff, Allah says, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa." So on this earth, I put khalifas, or sort of vicegerents, or stewards, or individuals that look after the earth. And part of that stewardship is to understand that there is balance. This idea of like mizan, and where there's imbalance one way, there's going to be a counteractive balance to that. So, for example, Saruman taking advantage of the forest in front of him was his downfall. So it was the Ents, the trees, that fought him back. So in causing disruption himself or creating that imbalance, there's also that nature's fighting back sort of thing. So you can also look at it in terms of climate change, because climate change itself is a symptom of our wrongdoing in nature. So so it's about seeking mizan, and it's about a balance, and also understanding that God's put us on this earth and entrusted us to look after it. So it's almost like the world is the heaven for the animals, and we are to be stewards and we have to look after the environment. I think one of the things with Islamic nature is this idea where all the prophets were shepherds. So they were looking after flocks, and that was to prepare them to look after people and to guide people and stuff. But there's also this idea that they were at one with nature, so they are at one with their fitra, and they are one with they are one with nature, and so they've aligned themselves to their sort of fitra and their connection to God, you can say. So that's why they're able to enact, you can say, the will of God more so than human beings. And generally, for us as well, like before we go into the divine presence in prayer and stuff, we use water and earth in the case of Tayammum. So there's this idea of going back to your sort of natural elements and connecting with the divine. So you can also see, I mean, what Tolkien's trying to say is when you don't have an understanding of this sacredness of nature, as a result, we take advantage of it, and as a result, we become less spiritual. Or they work in tandem, you can say. And it's the same thing with us as well. We need to be in touch with nature and stuff. And again, there's the idea of, in the German, the Khalifa, so this idea of Khalifa, where Allah gives us, I think in the Quran, he says, the true servant, to God belongs all the heavens and the earth, and everything within. And he goes, there is none amongst Muslims who plants a tree or sows seeds, and then a bird or a person or an animal eats from it, but is regarded as a charitable gift. So we're encouraged to sort of look after the earth. And even when we do wudu and purify ourselves and stuff, there's quantities we have to sort of stick to. So I think there's a hadith where I think when you're even on the bank and you're doing wudu with water in the stream that's running by you, you're even encouraged to be quite conservative with your water consumption. And there's this whole idea of not being wasteful. So in acting the command of God, and as a result embodying stewardship, it's one of the forms, or one of the best forms of ubudiyya, of slavery to God, because you're acting upon His command. So yeah, I leave it there. I forget how much I wrote. I'm going to move on to Hope and Despair. Oh, you want to input?
So, I just want to have one quick point. So, for example, when you tamper with the law of God or law of nature, it's replete in the Quran that nature comes back and punishes you. So, for the people of Ad and Thamud, they're punished. Also, the people of Noah, they're punished by a flood. And the kind of moment where you have that in Lord of the Rings for tampering with nature and the kind of like divine order is when nature attacks the trees, the Ents attack Isengard and destroy that civilization for their arrogance. So I just wanted to make that quick parallel.
And the word steward is also important, steward Khalifa. So Denethor, in the absence of the kings of Gondor, the ancestors of Denethor were placed there as literally Khalifa, that's what it means. So he's there because the king is not. He's there after the king, and he's supposed to be there. He's supposed to give it up when the king comes back. Denethor is an example of bad Khilafah, in the same way that Saruman and his servants are examples of bad Khilafah. Denethor is meant to be a caretaker of the city of Gondor, and he mismanages it. Faramir is a better Khalifa than him. And Sam, of course, as a gardener, as a steward.
I can't do this. I know. It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. We are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frost. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. Sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. this shadow, even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those are the stories that stay with you. Immense. Even if you are too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, you do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam? There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting.
Just before I move on, I like this backdrop still that I took from the second film, where the Ents were fighting Saruman, and it's quite a nice sort of visualization of the nature on the left, and just industry and its fires, and it's quite powerful. So hoping to spare. So again, just talk about Tolkien. So Tolkien went through World War I, World War II, and a big part of you can say the overarching theme or what he wanted to sort of convey was that we live in a world where we need to have hope, and he saw the worst of it. I mean, he was ill as well, and he also went the Spanish flu as well, if I'm correct. There was a plague.
He'd have been alive, yeah. So
yeah.
1917.
So in one of the letters he does talk about all the different struggles and stuff that he goes through. All the struggles that he sort of goes through in his life, and yet he maintains this idea of having a glimmer of hope. So you can see it in the character of Sam, who just had his sort of monologue at the end, and we just monologue just right now. So I think that's a uniting theme in all his works, and it's an overarching theology in his work. And with hope, what Tolkien talks about is also trust as well. So Frodo embodies that trust. So Frodo has to trust the rest of the Fellowship, especially Sam. He has to trust Gandalf initially, then Aragorn, then he has to trust Sam, and then even Gollum as well, despite knowing what the ring had done to him. It had sort of defiled him and turned him, or given him a split personality. So it's quite interesting how the Hobbits, they embody this sort of instinctual hope, and it's because of their sort of relationship to nature, and that's what Tolkien writes in one of his letters. And there's an embodiment of hope. I picked two people in this. I mean, there's quite a lot of characters that embody hope. There's Sam, and there's also Gandalf. Sam, as you just heard as well, he's the one that encourages Frodo to continue on in the journey. He, throughout the whole trip from the Shire onwards, sees the glimmer of beauty in the midst of sort of destruction and evil. And even when they've destroyed the ring as well, and they're clambering onto the rock, and it's almost certain that they're going to die as well, he still had that hope that he was going to marry when he gets back. And he also let Frodo know as well that he goes, I don't want to give up yet, it's not like me, somehow, if you understand. And he goes, by coming all this way, he said, by coming all this way, I don't want to give up yet, it's not like me, somehow, if you understand. And he sort of embodies that sort of hope. Frodo needed him in his journey, in his quest. So, and there's also moments as well where he brings salt with him. So he's going to Mordor. He's going to destroy the ring, and he brings that salt in case they have he said a chicken roast, I think it was. Yeah. So it's small moments like this, and I think it speaks to his relationship to the earth. He was a gardener essentially, and for his bodyguards. So I think Tolkien brought up the link with nature and having these sort of virtues, you can say. And then you have Gandalf. Gandalf is, I'd say, the embodiment of hope. And he also embodies, like, I think, ultimate slavehood in Obadiah, because I think from my reading and understanding is he aligns most with the will of Iluvatar. So as a result, I think that he then embodies ultimate slavehood, because he's able to give hope to all the races of Middle-earth. So all the peoples of Middle-earth. So he gives hope to Aragorn. He gives hope to Frodo, the Fellowship, even the Elves as well. So that was his role as a leader of the Wizards of the story. But also with Gandalf, he embodies action. So one part of it is just being hopeful, but there's also this idea of acting upon it. So there's this idea of even Musa alayhi salam. I mean, it's quite a nice parallel because they both have sticks, they both have sticks. So God said to Moses when he was in front of Fir'aun and his magicians and his court as well, he goes, throw down your staff, and part of it is, before that he was told, after he'd gone into the divine presence and spoken to God, the first thing he was told to do was, now go and speak to Fir'aun and go and face to the tyrant of the time. And then he was told to go with and he asked if I can go with my brother. So he had that hope that, okay, cool, I'm putting my trust in God. But when he gets there and God and the magicians have turned their sticks into snakes, or the illusion of the sticks into snakes, he then had to have that faith, and that trust, and then the action was to throw a stick in the floor, and that's a big thing, because even with the Bani Israel, they were told, all you have to do to claim Jerusalem is enter through the gates, and they couldn't even do that. So that's the part where there's inaction, and you can say that you have this hope and this trust in God and this certainty. And I'm just going to quickly go to despair. You have the two embodiments of despair is Denethor in Gondor. He used and Saruman as well. So both of them used the Palantir, which is like a seeing stone. So they looked into the Palantir to see what would fold, what would occur in the future, and also they would be given visions of what could happen, and they'd also have communication as well. So they both had a connection to Sauron, the Deceiver, and he showed them visions of his great armies and the impending doom. And as a result, they fell into despair, both of them. So Saruman then went and joined Sauron, and in Denethor's case, he just lost his mind, and he sent his son on a suicide mission because, again, he felt sort of sorry for himself. But his despair was more rooted in pride, because he was more rooted in pride, and I think so pride is the absence of hope, and both Saruman and Denethor are examples of succumbing to sort of despair, because they see the might of Sauron, or that was his deception. And then I think I'm going to use Quranic examples. I mean, in Baqarah you have Allah says He will test you with a lot of fear and loss, And Allah says, and He also gives tidings to the patient ones. And there's hope after your tribulations. And then you have Quranic examples where Allah doesn't give you more than you bear. You have Fa'inama Usuyusa, which is divine assurance. And I think Allah knows, and you don't know. And then I think the example of hope, one of the examples of hope in the Quran is, I think Surah, I think it's Maryam or Yusuf, I can't remember which one. I think it's Maryam, where Zakaria alayhi salam, he asks for a son, and he says, my Lord, indeed my bones have weakened, and my head is filled with white, and never have I made a supplication to you, my Lord, that I'm unhappy with. And indeed I fear the successor after me, and my wife has been barren, so give me from yourself an heir. And he had this hope that despite his age, I think it was 80 at the time, or maybe 90, I can't remember exact age, but I do recall that he was praying for a son for about 70 years. And he continued making the dua, and what I find quite intriguing is when he said, I've been in my supplication to you, my Lord, unhappy. I've never been in my supplication to you, my Lord, unhappy. And I don't think he was hopeful, but I think he was just going through the actions of calling to his Lord. And there's this idea as well where Allah sometimes doesn't answer people's prayers because he says that I love hearing from my slave. So there's this idea of Allah just withholding sometimes an answer to a dua. Maybe it's the hereafter. Maybe it comes later on. Maybe it's not the right time for it. But there's a wisdom behind that. But and I think it's quite assuring when he says, I like hearing my slave. So yes, so Allah sometimes loves to hear the call of a slave. Yeah. Is there any other points you want to add?
So one of the interesting things about the Palantir is that the way that, because Tolkien invented languages to describe for his peoples to use, and Palantir is made up of words that come from far and seeing, and that's the exact way that the word television is built. And so what's interesting is that television is something that allows you to see far into the distance. But what you see, you can be deceived by what you see because whoever's controlling the feed doesn't actually have to show you truth. And so manipulation so something that appears to be true, and you can't really sort of dismiss it, but it can be designed to erode your resolve. And another thing is that I think the words are written on the door, but one of the worst things, so if you believe in God, there are two basic ways you can go wrong, which is you can lose your faith, or you can keep your faith, but you're so certain that you're irredeemable that you lose hope of God's salvation, and effectively what you're doing is you're limiting the mercy of God in respect to yourself. So you fall into despair, and effectively that despair, just like falling out of faith, being in faith but in despair, it basically gives you the attitude that it doesn't really matter what I do now. And so you can go out of control that way and fall off the path. Because you believe in God, but you've realised it in yourself in a way that is harmful. And that's all about despair. And I think the words on the entrance are words that are attributed to Rumi. Right? Even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, ours is not a caravan of despair. And as long as you're alive, as long as you breathe, you're always redeemable. If you weren't redeemable, there'd be no point in you being alive. And so, fundamentally, in everything, we have to be, in our long kind of view, optimistic.
I'm just going to move on to Aragon, and that says leadership at the end. It just cut off. Apologies. I'm just going to whittle through these. So you have, I mean, there's no equivalence when it comes to the prophet, and there's no equivalence when it comes to, I think, some of the religious figures that we have in Argon. I think that Tolkien, with his religious beliefs, he used Argon to embody you could say, the universal man, so to speak. And these are qualities that I think we looked at and we thought were present within our sort of religious heritage. And so the first thing that he has is this idea of this gentleness. So when dealing with, for example, the Hobbits, he took them from Bree to Rivendell, and he took them from Bree to Rivendell, and he let them do what they wanted to do. So, for example, they had 5 or 6 meals, and he adjusted to them, and he let them do what they do. And I mean, in the same manner with the prophet, there's a quality of the prophet in this hadith which says that had you been severe and harsh-hearted with them, they would have broken away from you. And though Argon did smite Boromir, he did show him mercy, he did show him compassion and gentleness at the end as he was done. And then you have support even for the fringe people. So again, I think this comes from this idea of gentleness as well. Argon's attitude towards the Hobbits, you can see in the life of the prophet, there's many companions that are sort of fringe companions, you can say, that didn't have strength or didn't have status. You have, I think Sumaya was, I think, the slave of Abu Lahab, not Abu Jahl, I think it was, Abu Jahl, and it was Abu Jahl, and he supported her throughout, and even they say there was a story where there's a black woman who we don't even know her name, who was she used to clean the mosque, and I think the Sahabas said that she'd passed away the day before, and the Prophet said, "Why didn't you tell me the day before? Why didn't you tell me then? I wanted to go pray and do her burial." And then you have, like, for example, even like Zuhair, who's known for his he found it quite difficult to get married because of his look. But one of the things also was he was quite poor as well, and he used to sell like trinkets outside of Medina, and the Prophet said, like, the angel Jibril came and said, "Can I show you someone that God loves?" And then he was shown Zuhair, and then he put his hands behind his over his eyes from behind, and then he was able to smell the Prophet's hand, and he said, "Who will buy this slave, or who would marry this slave?" He was a slave at the time as well, and he said, "I'm not worth anything. I'm not worth anything in the market. I'm not worth anything for people as well." And the Prophet said, "Well, in the eyes of God, like you're worth something, and then you have a greater position in the eyes of God." And that was something that the Prophet sort of recognized. And the same thing with Argon as well. I think what Tolkien was trying to sort of convey as well was his attitude towards even like Grima, the Hobbits, and creatures throughout Middle Earth as well. So this is concern. So there's support for even the fringe group. There's service. So even though he was the leader of the company, he still served the company, and there's many examples of the Prophet where he served his community. Can you hear now? Yeah. So the Prophet served his community in the same manner, and there's even a saying where there's a hadith where he stood up in prayer, asking his making dua for his ummah. So he was always in service of people. He fed people as well. So this idea of regardless of your position, and even if you have a position of nobility as well, Aragorn has a position of nobility, and the prophet has a position of nobility, but there's total service to your underlings, you can say, or the people around you. And then he's a man of his word. The prophet was al-Amin, and it's the same with Aragorn. He gave his word to the men of they were from Dunharrow. Dunharrow? Yeah, they were Dunharrow. So he gave his word to the people of Dunharrow, and he released them. He could have used them later on and stuff, but
These are the men who were like, the men who were oath breakers.
yeah.
And he said he'll give them release to death if they fight for it. And
Yeah.
followed his word.
Yeah, humbleness also comes into something that we've touched on before. Prophets of noble lineage, same with Aragorn, and he lived in obscurity before he came out of the shadows. In the same way, before the prophet got prophethood, he went to the mountain, and he was in obscurity. He wasn't looking for status. And in the same manner, Aragorn was one of the rangers, one of the rangers on the outskirts of the Shire at the time. No one knew who he was until it was disclosed to everyone. Understanding people's roles, he understood that Frodo had to go on the journey on his own. He understood that he's got his own path. He understood that everyone played their part, and in the same way the prophet understood his companions had their place part. He had Sohaiba Rumi, I think it is, where he asked for advice about building trenches. So it's understanding even the people's roles around you, and not just taking the mantle of leadership and saying I can do everything myself. And you have this idea of the silent leader, and again it touches upon some of the stuff we've touched on previously. Aragorn is like a Mahdi figure. A lot of Muslims make that analogy, but yeah, he's a Mahdi figure in the sense that he, again, as I said before, he's in obscurity and he came out of the shadows. And the same way the Mahdi, according to I think the Sunni tradition, and maybe the Shia tradition as well, he'll be in obscurity, and then he will come out, and he would not want the position of this to be the Mahdi. It would be entrusted upon him. And the same thing with the prophet. He needed that support at the start from his wife, because he understood how weighty the mantle of sort of prophethood was as well. I'm going to move on to the last section on sort of success, and I think principally, overall, I think if you look at the whole journey of the ring being gone to, of Frodo's journey to Mount Doom, you can see, well, I would say he failed in regards to succumbing to the pull of the ring, and you can say that I think what Tolkien didn't want to do was, I know he had this great narrative of good versus evil, and we have to do good and we can't give it to evil, but he finished his story with, and Frodo gave into the ring, and he essentially gave into the vice of the ring, and therefore he failed. And then also what happened was, by consequence, Gollum or Smeagol had fallen into Mount Doom as a consequence. And I think what Tolkien was trying to achieve with this was, I think that we've got like internal and external conflicts in our life, and I don't think God looks at the external, where have I prayed 5 times a day? Of course you have to do that, but sometimes you try and fall short. And what Tolkien's trying to say is, even good people, even the best of people can fall short. And Frodo did fall short. He said afterwards to, I think, Aragorn and Legolas, he said, like, I failed the quest. And he'd resisted throughout the whole films and throughout the whole book and throughout his whole journey, and he'd given in at the end. And what Tolkien's trying to say is, he wasn't a failure. And what Tolkien says is, I think in two of his letters, he talks about this idea that it was where he won was these specific moments in his journey where he'd shown mercy. And there was a moment in Bilbo's story where he was going to kill Gollum, but he didn't. And Frodo was going to kill Smeagol on 2 occasions, but he didn't, because he saw his humanity within Gollum. And what Tolkien's trying to say is these moments that define, you can say, our lives, our existence, and it's not really the outcome, because you can say that the prophets, for example, all the prophets, or most of the prophets, from a worldly sense, were failures. For example, Noah alayhi salam, though he built the ark and though he saved some people and animals, he was 30 followers after 950 years. So from a worldly sense, he wasn't successful. The prophet had many moments where he'd not been successful in the worldly sense, but that's not what God's looking at. I think they're examples because they're examples of what success means. And I think there's a verse in Surah Furqan, I think it's Surah Furqan, where Allah says, I think it's قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. So he goes that the mu'minun are successful, or the believers are successful, and then he goes on to say that the ones that are successful are the ones that have khushu, awe of God within their prayers. I think there's people that the seers, a lot of the jurisprudence say that it's not just awe within the prayer, it's awe outside of the prayer. So it's awe, seeing God in your day-to-day lives, and it's these moments of shown mercy that could be the difference between you succeeding in the next life. That is, and the example that I think there's an awliya who saw, and this is not a fiqh point or there was a vision that or a dream that one of the awliya had of Imam Ghazali, and we all know of Imam Ghazali and his works, and he wrote a lot and he served thousands of students, and he imparted a lot of knowledge even to us as well. And Imam Ghazali came to him in his dream, and Imam Ghazali gave this awliya, I forget who it was, but he gave this awliya sort of glad tidings that, look, I went to paradise. And the person asked, he goes, for what is it that you went to paradise? Is it your prayers? Is it what you wrote? Is it the students you taught? What is it that made you successful? And he goes, he said, one night when I was writing my book with my ihya, he said that there was a fly that had come upon my quill, and it wanted to drink from the inkwell. And he said that when I saw this happen, I thought, let me hold my pen still so that the fly can drink what it can be satiated, it can do its thing, and it can drink from the inkwell. And then the fly went away, and he said that God said to me that because of that moment, or because of that moment of showing rahmah to the fly, or to show mercy to the fly, all your work for the sake of God was accepted. Your writing, your books, your Quran, and recitation, your prayers, your tahajjuds, they were all accepted because of that one moment, because of that action. And we all know the story of the woman who fed the dog, and the man who killed 1,000 people repenting. But I think that's a good analogy for even what Tolkien is trying to capture, where ultimately we're flawed, and you can set on this journey to achieve success. want to destroy the ring, you want to destroy your lower nafs. But you may not, and God's not looking at that. God's looking what's in your heart. And he says this as well. All I'm looking at is the heart of a believer. And even that verse as well. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, is Allah says essentially success. The successful believers are ones not with the biggest beards, not the ones that wear the headscarf this way, or not the ones that stand in prayer and stuff. It's a matter of the heart, and that's what made Frodo successful, because in his journey, because he showed mercy to Gollum, he saw his humanity in Gollum. Was he then successful because of a consequence of Gollum slipping and falling into the fire? And I think that's what Tolkien was trying to capture with what is success in this world. So yeah, I think that's that. And then the next bit would be discussion, if there's anything anyone wants to add.
Right, is everyone still awake?
Okay, put the lights on. Somewhere there.
I know it's been a lot to take in. It's not, it's not easy for people to sit down for like 2-3 hours. And can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. So it's not easy to sit for 2-3 hours and take in. And some of the kids, thank you for being so patient. I've got a couple of acknowledgements to make. I'd like to make some acknowledgements to the people who've helped us as we've done this process. So first of all, I'd like to thank rumiscave. Thank you so much for indulging all our crazy ideas. Because, if I'd gone to another centre and said like Islam and Lord of the Rings or Islam and Harry Potter, I'd probably be in some refutation video by some next person. But I'd probably be in a Down Man refutation video. But secondly, I would like to thank my colleagues, Uzair and Noor. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you guys. Honestly, I really want to say, because, you come with an idea, and then for people to take that up and to give you that sort of validation, that fellowship, that sohbah, we've been up to God knows, ridiculous o'clock brainstorming this and having restaurant and food sessions, and yeah, it's been.
Can I also add as well, there's a lot we didn't cover. There's so much that we wanted to cover, and I think there could be a part 2 as well. I think there's Yasmin, who's part of Sacred Footsteps. She wants to do on women in spirituality in the Lord of the Rings. She did a paper at uni about that. She couldn't come today. I didn't want to be one that relays this stuff because I don't think it's right. I think if it's her work, she should do it. And plus, she's female. And even in our brainstorm as well, we've got so many different things that we wanted to cover. And even myself, I skipped through a lot of the things that I wrote. Maybe you can publish this. We're even thinking about even a podcast as well. And the thing is, one of the things that we're not actually Tolkien scholars or anything that I've just got an obsession with it, but I don't know everything. But I'm sure I think amongst us, there's people that know more and want to contribute, and I think we're going to do a podcast.
Yeah, because basically this year is the 20th anniversary of Lord of the Rings. Next year, it's going to be like the release of the Lord of the Rings series. So remember we mentioned the Silmarillion? It's basically the Silmarillion, the plot, but in kind of like TV series form. So we want to do a series of 10 to 20 podcasts, and we want to invite people who are scholars and experts in our community on Tolkien. To carry on the acknowledgements, the biggest acknowledgement I want to make to Uncle Najmuddin, right here. My Uncle Najmuddin's been since I was a kid, since I was a wee little lad. He was the one who got me to watch Lord of the Rings. He got me into Lord of the Rings, and we were kids. Other kids who were into some of these, we were in all sorts of cartoons, but he was taking us to Lord of the Rings to watch the movies. We'd have endless, after we'd done our maths and science tuition, we just talked Tolkien and Islam and stuff like that. So he was the first person who planted those seeds in my head. So I really, he's brought him and his brood of boys. So I just wanted to, a round of applause for Uncle Najmuddin and his boys.
I'd like to thank Uzair, Noor, Saladin on a wonderful presentation, mashallah, with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of in-depth knowledge, with a lot of insight, mashallah. Saladin's father, mashallah, rahmatullahi alayhi, Abu Bilal, Fahim, Masari, mashallah, was the Bilbo Baggins of our society. He was the adventurer, he was the traveller. Mashallah, he spoke many languages, 20 altogether, I think, 7 very fluently, mashallah. And he would travel around, I think, 120 countries. So, mashallah, he met all people throughout the world, mashallah. And we learned a lot from him, from his adventures, and he mentored us as our elder, and mashallah, we tried to give back to his children. I think a couple of points, really, really valuable points. Okay.
Just quickly finish the acknowledgements. So, Lamia in the audience, thank you so much. And actually, because when I've done 2 years ago the Islam and Harry Potter talk, she said, "Why don't you do something about Lord of the Rings?" And this was just about to get on the bus, and we didn't finish the conversation, but she really helped us with our brainstorm, so thank you. Arwa was there as well, so a round of applause for you too. And most of all, I want to say to all the people who came today, I really, really appreciate you coming, because I didn't know how it was going to turn out, and this has been like a year in the workings, and it's nice to see it. It's nice to see it come together. So thank you. Round of applause for all yourselves. Right, so we're going to kick off question and answers, but I'd like, because he's like the Gandalf of our company, I'd like Uncle Najmuddin to say a few points on Lord of the Rings and some of the...
Mashallah, Uzair, Noor and Saladin mentioned so many points. A couple of things I wanted to bring out about the points they said. Noor was talking about the fact that in today's, knowing the language of the people you're speaking to, and it's not sufficient we know English, we need to know the culture, their mentality, their sensibilities. 30 years ago, when I was doing dawah to people under the remits of Saladin's father, we would be talking to them about books, talking to them about stories in books. Now, the medium I notice is films, quoting from films, quoting lines from films. Children's love that. That's the medium they're engaged with. And so being aware of this and being able to quote the lines, beautiful lines in this film, which remind us of death just being a pathway, that reminding us that through this hardship, these travels of life, these are the adventures of life, those really great adventures where you have to overcome great hardships. These are all idioms that can be utilized in expressing the universal truths. Islam is Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Ashhadu Muhammad Rasulullah. It is the religion of submission to Allah and following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it is also the religion of Adam alayhi salam. It is also the religion of Nuh alayhi salam. It is also the religion of Musa alayhi salam. It is also the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Islam is the truth from Allah to mankind. And what we see reflected in these stories is echoes of that truth. Tolkien himself, was a professor of English literature, I think originally from Cambridge, and then he went to Oxford. And he studied ancient myths from all over the world. It's not like Eurocentric tinge, but it was from Norse mythology, Greek mythology, and he took the universal truths that existed within them and formulated this very coherent, shall we say, English, British, Celtic mythology that you have today. Those universal truths, the universal truth of a one God, of one creator, the universal truth of God creating angels, malaikas, that would serve him, that would each have their own function. And he actually mentions in Silmarillion later on that these malaika were later taken and called gods in themselves. So there we see once again how mythologies were a reflection of truths that later got distorted and changed by mankind. And even, as I said in Silmarillion, he mentions the fact that these Valar, these angels, were taken to be gods in themselves, although they had no free will, although they could not countenance the will of the one God. So it's a beautiful story about man, It's a beautiful story that reflects many truths. And there was so much depth in there. And I'd like to congratulate our brothers on what they've expressed. There's so much food for thought. In fact, inshallah, they're going to initiate a series where they'll be speaking about particular topics in more depth, where there'll be more opportunity for questions and answers. But may Allah bless you, all three of you, Uzair, Noor, Saladin, for providing us this knowledge, this information, this hikmah, okay, where we can utilize, shall we say, modern mediums to express the fundamental truth of the one God, of our dependence on Him. Uzair was talking about the fitra, how our closeness to nature, okay. These are all ultimately signs from Allah, ayatullah, nature is an ayatullah, and all signs of Islam. They're all reflections of Islam. The Islam of Nuh alayhi salam, the Islam of Adam alayhi salam. So once again, may we give a warm congratulations to all of them and thank them and remember them in our du'as.
You know what, I literally, with Antoinette's thing, we could just literally do a whole series of podcasts. And you know, you sit there with your coffee and your tea. There was these in the audience, as I was greeting people when they were coming in, I noticed these two young men at the back in the white shirts with their mother. And these two are Lord of the Rings fanatics, apparently. So I wanted to open the floor to them, actually. So are there any thoughts or questions that you had or any observations that you'd like to share? You can come to the front if you want. What's your name? Muhammad. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. I was also thinking that there's another thing, also a connection between Lord of the Rings and Islam, and that is that Aragorn is also like Sayyidina Ali, because he lived in Rivendell, and it's like that Sayyidina Ali, he lived in the house of the Prophet, and he also married his daughter, and Sayyidina Fatima, he also married all of them too.
Right. Is there any questions or anything? Any other observations you had? That's do you know what? I never actually thought that. Round of applause for this young man. And Islam, I know throughout the talk you had things you wanted to say. So,
one thing, right?
Can everyone hear? Can you speak a bit louder?
Okay. When the topic on despair, hope and despair, right? There was a one that I thought was quite pertinent to the situation, right, with Gollum and Aragorn in that one. Okay, you know when Aragorn was going and he were talking about, for example, because he knew he was fighting on the side of truth, on the side of justice, right? He wasn't scared to go in the, for certain death. And also similarly, on the point of despair, when in Surah Yusuf, when Yaqub is talking to his children, right? After they've already thrown Yusuf in the well, and then they lost Yusuf's brother, right? Which was all the father of Allah. But Yaqub tells his kids, don't despair of the mercy of Allah, because none despair of the mercy of Allah except the kafirun, right? Which is the people that reject Allah. So in that sense, right, you can talk about that. As a Muslim, you can't limit the mercy of Allah, right? Which is something that, so it's always to be hopeful, and that was something that was mimicked in Lord of the Rings.
Thank you. Do any of the people on Zoom have questions or anything they'd like to say? People on Zoom?
You have to look.
I'll come over to the chat. Drop it in the chat function. So
But in the meantime, does anyone in the audience have any questions or observations they'd like to make? Yeah, Faisal?
Assalamu alaikum everyone. One of the things I want to quickly pick up on was, so in the last sort of 2-3 months, as the weather's got better, well, kind of, I decided to sort of go, just on local walks, and I heard, I saw somewhere lately that that back in the days when our parents used to go out and feed the birds and stuff, they used to say to the children, give your salams to the birds or give your salams to nature. And there's certain things like, as I heard that, it's been crazy because I relocated to London like a week before lockdown, and it's screwed everything for everybody. But when I went walking, I literally went with that intention. I thought, let me just try to explore what this is. And I started to notice certain things, certain patterns with, like, for example, like, you walk past the bush, and you notice certain butterflies just sitting there, and you would actually start to feel these internal messages coming to you about, like, the greatness of God and stuff. And unfortunately, I think with what's happened to Islam nowadays, it's become very sort of commodified, and these sort of lessons, like, people see them as cultural practices and things like that, but they do have Islamic significance, because you have Sulaiman alayhi Islam, the prophets who used to talk to animals. So the spiritual aspect has sort of withered away, and people are just fighting over whether you should wipe your socks or something like that. But on a realistic level, there's a deeper connection. And also, you might have heard of Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. He does some stuff with like Welsh, sort of what they call, it's that choir stuff. But historically, he's done. There's one video, like it's a nasheed, like I think it's a Welsh nasheed. It's called the Prophet's Anthem, and you sort of, when I watched that myself, it sort of linked with Lord of the Rings. I think I sent it across to you as well. But yeah, that's something that I just thought I'd share. Definitely.
Thank you. Anybody have some like questions or observations? Huh? Ah, Lamia. Yes, I was actually thinking of calling upon you. Right, do you want to come to? Yeah, if you want.
Okay.
Then everyone can hear you.
So I haven't formulated what I want to say, but I
Come more in short.
Okay, sure. Right. Thank you. So, I know that you didn't cover all the topics, and if you notice in the trilogy, I think there's only 2 females. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think there's only 2 females in the entire trilogy. Like, is there any other female character in the book that's shown in the films? Is Arwen and Aemon.
In the books, there's also Bombardier.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Do you think Aemon and Arwen, right?
Yes.
There's Galadriel.
Oh, there is Galadriel. Yes. Yeah. So
not
many. Yeah. So I noticed when I first watched the films, even though there's not many women, the women that are in the films, they're all very different. They all speak their minds. They're all very strong characters. And just looking at ourselves in the Muslim community, and like, when you look at Islamic history, when you look at, for example, like great men of Islam, like Omar, may God be pleased with him, and Uthman, we are taught that men in Islamic history, they have different personalities, they have different traits, they're different people. Whereas when we hear about a woman in Islam, it tends to be like the same type of personality. So I think what's really cool is with Aowen, for example, she followed her gut. She went to the battlefield, even though it was unconventional. She didn't conform. Arwen, she followed her heart. She chose love over immortality, and I think it's a really amazing reminder that as Muslim women, we are also just as different. We should also be able to follow our guts, follow our hearts, follow our minds, and yeah, I think there's so many strong women of Islam, and I'm not studied, but I know that they exist, and it would be so nice if we learnt more about them rather than hearing about the women who were shy or stayed at home. There's so many women who, just like the characters in Lord of the Rings, they were not conformists. They changed society because they didn't fear. They only feared God. They didn't fear anyone else. So I love the women.
I think Sheikh Mohammed Nadwi has a book on, I think, women's scholarship in Islam. Is that the one? So I think that's quite groundbreaking because there isn't much work done in that space. And then also just want to add, I think when I think was it Godfrey who was the one that took Frodo from when he crossed it. So when Arwen came in, I think in the books there was a different character, it was a male character, and I think it was quite. I'm glad that the filmmakers added that role for Arwen, and even like with Aragorn, even conceded to the fact that okay, you're a faster rider than me, and it was just I feel like it emboldened women. That's what I thought, and yeah, that's just yeah.
That's the idea.
Like just on the women characters, there's Sahabiyat like Nusayba who went to the battlefield and fought for Prophet ﷺ. There's that famous Arab warrioress. There's a Khawla bint al-Azwar, and then there's also there's also other examples. Oh yeah, of course, Aisha radiallahu anha. But we do want to do like a podcast or a series of like Islam and Lord of the Rings and women, and that's Yasmin from Sacred Footsteps. So we really, really want to collaborate with you, inshallah, because we feel as men perhaps we wouldn't do the topic justice, and perhaps we're not the right people to speak about it. So inshallah, that will be in the works. Is anybody got any questions or observations they'd like to make, or criticisms? Yeah, please. Like, we really want to do this better. I know we've had technical issues. We've also had you sitting down for a really long time. So if you have any feedback or you have any more Lord of the Rings observations, the floor is yours. Yes.
I remember when the films came out, there was a bit of an anti-Islamic movement against Lord of the Rings. They said that Tolkien was influenced by the Shaitan, or had some kind of influence from the Jinn, because there was no other way that someone could have created so many different worlds, so many different races. It was just seemed to be incredible at the time. So I was wondering if you guys have come across anything like that.
Well, when I did Islam and Harry Potter and Islam and Lord of the Rings, I had to suffer and watch this video of this kind of scholar refuting Harry Potter for an hour and a half. So you do get that, like, Islam, black magic. But my approach is popular society and culture. Our kids are always going to, they're going to engage with it whether we like it or not. So we might as well have our own stamp of authority on it.
I just want to say, Tolkien himself was born in South Africa, came here, lived all his life here. His knowledge of beyond Europe was very limited. So he did have a very Eurocentric sort of flavour to his whole Tolkien. By indications from his writing, he never had anything against non-Europeans. But remember, he was writing a story for his grandkids. Okay, so his main emphasis was to get a moral story out for his grandkids. He wasn't looking from a global perspective or anything like that. And the irony is, because he didn't want to explicitly associate it with Christianity in the way that C.S. Lewis subsequently did, his theology is far closer to Islam than it is to Christianity. There is no sort of resurrection, there was no Christ-like figure within the Trinity figure, within the Lord of the Rings series. It is the one God who creates the angels, the fallen angel being Melkor. So the irony is, by trying to keep it universal, trying to keep that ancient mythology going on, he actually relates it more towards Islamic theology unconsciously than he does towards Christian, which is what tragically C.S. Lewis did. So there was a Eurocentric tint to it. Okay, he was a human being after all, a well-educated human being, a spiritual human being, but he would have suffered from the typical stereotypes of the time. That's what we want. Not to expect too much out of it, but not to, shall we say, throw the baby out with the
maybe
bath.
the discussion would have just died out.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So, you know the actor that played Sauron, I think it is.
Who played it? I can't remember.
Well, Benedict played
Saruman.
Saruman, sorry,
Are
yeah.
you talking about
Christopher Lee.
Yeah. So
well.
yeah. So he's played a few dark roles in movies and stuff, but apparently he was involved with a lot of the occult. But he even said in one of his things somewhere that he wouldn't recommend anybody get involved with them. So yeah, it's a pretty dark subject. But then I guess we've got Islam as the light, and with all the darkness that is out there, there's always some light to extinguish it.
I think there was one aspect. I think, were you saying that there were people accusing Tolkien of he must have been inspired by Shaitan because nobody else could write that much stuff of him? So I think a lot of that is that Tolkien was very specialised, right? As I was saying, he was very specialised, and also he didn't like all. It wasn't all new, so he was relying a lot on sort of on Beowulf, on Old English epics, and he was kind of some of what he was trying to do was put together like almost an origin story for the British Isles in a way. But he was relying a lot on Norse mythology. That's why got the god figure is called the Allfather. That's not a Tolkien invention. That's from Viking culture. So he knew a lot about those cultures, and he spent decades and decades studying them. He wouldn't know a thing about, I don't know, physics, or do you know what I mean? He's highly specialised in language and stories, mythology, and so if that's what he does for decades. He can borrow from those things, add something from himself, and what he does, and create, build some languages. But what he does is actually it's all within the ability of a human to do. So you don't really need to kind of say, okay, he must have had help from Satan. But also, what's the thing? You look at something by the fruit. Is he telling you to go out and learn magic or whatever? Like, no. And when we study these things, we're not going to say you got to go and learn like magic or whatever. That's not the point of it, right? It's more what is the fruits of it. A lot of things can be used for good and for evil, and as long as we take the right things from a particular story, and as long as we don't deny things that are essential truths, then I don't think we need to worry too much about. And I'm sure you're not. You're just asking about it, but there's a kind of it is a piece of like everything's a Freemasonry thing. Everything's like like obviously that stuff exists, but some stuff is just like people with their imaginations and stuff they've come across.
Yeah. I was doing a literature degree at the time, and my take on it was that she had a fantastic imagination.
Yeah.
Just quickly, idea that we didn't mention, Sauron is basically the job. I just wanted to mention that. The one eye and the symbolism of the one eye and everything, and the towers and that came to mind. I forgot to mention that. But who else would like to? Who's got a thought in their head that they can't suppress?
Can't reach it. You can come.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. I'm just going to read a small extract. It's one of my favourite lines. The boys hear me ranting on about it all the time, so I'll share with you. I think it's put on the tongue of Sam, and he's talking about stories. And obviously we know Lord of the Rings is an epic. It's got everything within it, but just how important that is. So he says, and that's the way of a real tale. Take any one that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of tale it is. Happy ending or sad ending, but the people in it don't know, and you don't want them to. So for me, this is really an idea of life and everything it brings within it. Even in the story, I mean, you're there, you're looking at Frodo, and he's on a mountain, and there's lava pouring out the volcano, and you're thinking a dead guy, but he's not, because that would be the end of the story, and you almost know it's going to be a happy ending. And it just reminds me of the hadith of the Prophet that everything is good for the believer. Even something that's seemingly bad is actually good, and it's going to be a happy ending for the believer. So for me, when I watch something like that, it's just a constant reminder of that. And just to close, the idea of Imam Ghazali, how he closes his epic Ihya al-Ulumuddin, 40 volumes. And essentially the message in the end, I'm paraphrasing, is it's all good, it's all good. So that the story just really reminds me of that. Whatever people go through in life, those, failing exams, divorces, deaths, bereavements, a lot of it, it's all good, inshallah.
I just want to give her a round of applause. You remind me of what you've done with these two boys. Remind me of my own mum, because when I was their age, my mum used to record all the Harry Potters and the Lord of the Rings and put them in, at that time, technically it wasn't legal because of copyright or whatever. She did that for us, and I'm really proud of what you've done with your boys. Mashallah, the credit to you. And like I saw them begin how show us your stack of Lord of the Rings books. So well done, Mum, and well done to boys, and of course Uncle Najmuddin, well done to him for giving them the message of Lord of the Rings. And also there's something Uzair said, and Islam. There's something Uzair said that he didn't get to cover as much, which I'd like him to expand on. Like this whole idea of the monomyth about how, it's just Lord of the Rings, like anything, it's just a repackaging of the same story. But I'd like to give the floor to Uzair to say a bit more on that.
I mean, there's not much to add, but I just wanted to also add to one of the points that Uncle made. I mean, he did study myths, and he took from a lot of the old, Norse stories, and you also have I don't know if people are familiar with Joseph Campbell as well, in the States. So he had this idea of, you have the idea of the monomyth, and he also had this idea of, I think it was a hero with 1,000 faces. So technically there's a journey the individual goes through, and what he did was he drew from all these myths that he'd come across, and from India to Finland, and wherever they came from. And what he found was that there's universal themes, and there's universal sort of parables in each of these stories. And what he did was he consolidated on each. So I think the aim with this was, a lot of the things that we're talking about are quite universal, and even Islamically, and I think I mentioned it as well, in Surah Yusuf, I think it says, or Surah Maryam, I get them too mixed up, but it says, this Quran is a book of stories, so that you reflect, and the reason why even like the story of Prophet Joseph is so profound is because it has those universal messages that is also present, I believe, in something like Lord of the Rings, and that's why it's timeless. That's why people still read it. That's why I still watch the films and read the books, because there's a universality to the message. Like in 200 years' time, it's still going to be around, and I do believe that it will be. You have the Magna Carta for this country and how important it is and stuff. I think that the Lord of the Rings would be sort of enshrined, and it will become a big part of, I'd say, English culture, you can say? Yeah.
Literature, culture,
yeah.
Popular imagination.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say quickly, because people just get caught up in all the stories, oh yeah, there's one's magic, bid'ah, shirk, haram, whatever. Like, and I'm tired and bored of it, once for one. And two, like you said, it's the same human story, just repackaged with different characters. That's all it is. That's all Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Narnia. This is the same human story of good and evil, overcome. And all of them have this common theme of overcoming the nafs. So in Harry Potter, like when Harry destroys all the Horcruxes, the last Horcrux he destroys is the one within himself. That shows you to overcome the biggest enemy, overcome the external enemy, you must confront the internal enemy. The ring is the parable of that, and it's just repackaged the same story. And I was wondering, Noor, if you want to add anything on that. And then I'll open to more questions as well and comments. How are you all still happy for more questions and answers, or are you quite tired?
If there is.
If there
is.
French lady, is it French lady? You want to say something?
No, I don't have a question. I just found it very interesting. I just want to say thank you. No, I just want to say thank you, and that I have found it very interesting how using the film it applies to life, everyday life. So it's a very interesting way to understanding wisdom in a concrete way of living through it. So very, very interesting.
Oh, I know some of you have come from really far. So there's a sister at the front who's come all the way from Manchester. Round of applause. Thank you so much. That means a lot to us. And some of you must have also come from really far. So thank you for coming.
Can anybody outdo Manchester? Who's from further?
Riyadh.
I win. Technically, sort of, maybe not, but still it counts.
Well, I think Manchester's the.
Well done. Alhamdulillah. I'm really, already humbled that you could come and sit for 3 hours. It's not easy. Like to hear three like bearded guys talk. That's humble. But is there any closing remarks that any of you have?
Not really. Just ultimately, like, what I forgot your name, but you mentioned something about. I think it really struck a chord with like being people of faith and believing in an afterlife and believing in a sort of there's a place where there is a perfect justice. It frees you from being too result orientated, and so as long as you try, as long as you align yourself with what is right, it doesn't really matter if you lose, because you can't lose, because we know that good doesn't lose, God doesn't lose. So it doesn't matter. Like even like in some sense, even if Sauron rose, even if he got the ring back, it would still matter that Merry and Pippin and Frodo and Sam, they'd all made that effort. Because ultimately that's success. That's exactly it. And so yeah, it's not about worldly goals. You act as if they matter, because you have to strive towards them. But the way you interact with God is basically like that. You don't let that. In a way, you also believe as if they don't. You see beyond them to the ultimate one. And so I thought that's basically it. Like what you said, it was sort of, that's kind of the summation, I think. So thank you for saying that. Yeah, there are many endings.
I mean, just like the Lord of the Rings, I think this is a long ending as well. So I think we wrap up there.
Yeah.
So, thank you all very much. Do stick around. We got some snacks for you guys. So please, we've got some biscuits and crisps, I think. So, we can carry on this discussion as we kind of like eating and merrymaking and hobbiting and all this stuff. But I don't have any second breakfast to give you, so I apologize for that.
What's crisps, precious?
They're potatoes.
Potatoes?
Or they're fried up mashed potatoes. Alright, so we'll finish on that. Thank you all for coming.